Another minute or so, Craig?
Sure.
And before the end of the meeting, Kevin, I'll just say thank you.
Sure. I'm assuming, Kevin, that by now you could give your speech. We will be ready to get started by the time you're done.
Sure. Okay, so. All right, welcome everyone. If this is your first time joining us virtually, you will notice that you are currently muted and everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting except for the committee co-chairs, Alita and Craig, and any presenters as we move through the agenda. Following the presentation, the co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon on your device and pressing the raise hand button, not the wave or thumbs up, as those will disappear. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you are on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is available for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see your chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you will need to go to the participant section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me, I'm here for support. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. I guess we will call this meeting to order. This is the September 12th, 2023 meeting of Community Board 8 Manhattan Congestion Pricing Task Force. I'm Craig Lader, one of the co-chairs, along with Alita Camp.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, and we are pleased to have everyone. Let's, I guess, move right into the agenda. And the first item on the agenda tonight, I thought I had it posted. Just give me 1 second, just pull it up. I thought it was just news updates and developments since the last congestion pricing meeting, task force meeting that took place. Yes, review of news updates and traffic mobility review board meetings held on July 19th and August 17th. So in terms of putting aside the traffic mobility review board, which we'll go into in depth, really the news updates are that there has been some installation of some of the actual equipment, the tolling equipment, along parts of the boundaries of where the congestion pricing toll zone is, which is south of and inclusive of 60th Street. And some of our friends outside of New York City, namely New Jersey and perhaps elsewhere, actually, Alita may know more because she may have been keeping track of it more than I have. There have been pursuing some legal challenges to the congestion and pricing law on various grounds, one of which is an assertion that the environmental assessment that was performed was not sufficient enough, and that it should have been an environmental impact statement, which is a more rigorous environmental review that was performed. Whether this has any chance of succeeding or not, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't pretend to know. And it's not surprising that there are going to be some legal challenges. But as of now, the MTA and Tribal Bridge and Tunnel Authority, which is charged with implementing the law and congestion pricing, is still aiming to have this up and running by spring of 2020. I thought it was April, 2024. So I believe it was April. I don't know that there's been a definitive time frame, but it was supposed to be within 330 days of when the federal approval was given, the finding of no significant impact, which occurred, I believe it was in May. So that is the time frame in which they are operating on. Alita, before I move on to the Traffic Mobility Review Board, did you want to add anything?
No, the lawsuit that Craig is referring to with the environmental issues is the one I believe filed by New Jersey, which raises the question of how much additional traffic and congestion there will be by the entrance to the George Washington Bridge, which will just completely bypass the zone at this point. Staten Island, they were saying that they were going to file a lawsuit. Then there were indications that they would join with New Jersey. I don't know whether they have, and there are a lot of different courts to look at. So I couldn't find anything specific about Staten Island. And in the meantime, there has been bipartisan legislation raised in Congress by Long Island representatives, I believe, and also New Jersey, that congestion pricing is not appropriate, or is there's something wrong with it and it should be stopped. I don't know the details of that either, just that there has been that legislation introduced. And I believe that there either are or will be private lawsuits in New York City as well by private citizens opposing congestion pricing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Alita. Actually, before we move into, sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to order things. So what I'm just going to do now is provide a brief overview of the Traffic Mobility Review Board meetings. And then I will open up the floor, and I will begin for anyone who may be here representing any of our elected officials. I will call on you first. Unless we actually have any elected officials here. Kevin, if you do see any actual elected officials, please let me know so I can acknowledge them immediately.
Before you get started though, Craig, I just want to point out that there are links to a number of these meetings on the Congestion Pricing Task Force page on the website, and also to note that the public, while invited to watch the TMRB meetings, was not invited to speak. So they were short, just a little over an hour, but that's because they were not inviting comments from the public.
Right, that is absolutely correct. So then for those of you who may be new to this meeting, I will just try to define some of the acronyms that we are going to be using, especially TMRB, which stands for Traffic Mobility Review Board. And that is the board that, under the law that enables congestion pricing, has been appointed by the MTA and is going to essentially be responsible for determining the toll rates and tolling policies related to congestion pricing beyond those that are stipulated specifically in the law, which was passed as part of the 2019 New York State budget bill. So as Alita mentioned, there have been 2 meetings of this board. The board was not able to be formed until after the environmental assessment process, the environmental review process was complete, and the finding of no significant impact was issued. So it was after that time where they were able to meet for the first time. So the first meeting occurred on July 19th, and a follow-up meeting occurred on August 17th, and there will be at least one more meeting after that, and I will get to that shortly. And as Alita mentioned, these meetings are broadcast live on the MTA website through a link on the MTA website and on YouTube on the MTA's YouTube page. They, at least in my assessment, and Alita and I spoke about this before, and we both agree, there hasn't necessarily been a significant amount of advance notice of these meetings, especially the second meeting. I was not aware a week before that meeting took place that that second meeting was occurring. They did not announce at the end of the first meeting when that second meeting was. They did not announce the next meeting date at the conclusion of the second meeting. And there has been no public participation so far. I don't know if the plan is to allow that after the Traffic Mobility Review Board provides its recommendations, but they have allowed members of the public to attend the meetings in person, but there has been no comment period in those meetings or for the public that may be watching remotely. So the first meeting featured a presentation from MTA staff that provided the TMRB with essentially a detailed overview of congestion pricing, much of what we've talked about in the past, And that led to various key questions that staff reported back on.
Craig, before you continue, the format of the meeting was unusual in that, and I'm terrible at names, as probably everyone knows, there was that woman who served a specific role, who was there to ask about questions, field questions, provide some answers, distribute questions among members of the board who might know, and generally give a big overview of what the decisions in front of them are.
Right, and that's right. That's who I was referring to, someone from the MTA staff who essentially is, I would assume, staffing the Traffic Mobility Review Board and assembling this presentation and answering the questions, and when unable to answer the questions, is in charge of assigning the research, if you will, to come back with more detailed responses later on. So there was an extensive presentation to brief the TMRB on what congestion pricing was and what was within the context of the law and what their charge was. So essentially, they were looking at the purpose and need and a synopsis of the environmental assessment's findings. And again, the charge of the TMRB is to develop a proposed tolling structure that reduces congestion in the Manhattan Central Business District and generates sufficient revenue to fund $15 billion for MTA transit improvements, which we understand to be essentially $1 billion in annual revenue for bonding purposes, and that it has to be within the parameters set by the enabling legislation, and that the TMRB can recommend different tolls for different types of vehicles and for different types of days, but they are limited in terms of that they must follow the other mandates that were identified, which include that qualifying authorized emergency vehicles and qualified vehicles transporting people with disabilities are exempt, and that the toll prices will vary, and that the overnight or off-peak toll will be set at or below 50% of the standard toll, at least from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m., and that vehicles or passenger vehicles, not trucks necessarily, will not be allowed to be charged more than once per day. Neither will New York City taxis or for-hire vehicles, and for-hire vehicles meaning Ubers, Lyfts, black livery cars and such, and that there is a 25% discount that will be provided to qualifying frequent low-income drivers after the first 10 trips of the month. And I believe low income in this means below $60,000 in household income. So they are essentially then looking at 7 key areas: discounts by time period, discounts for those already paying a tunnel toll to enter the central business district, meaning potential offsets against tolls already paid, rates for buses, rates for trucks, rates for government vehicles, developing a plan for taxis and for-hire vehicles, and then other discounts and exemptions. And they described it as a delicate balancing exercise, or almost like a Rubik's Cube, where you have to find the precise combination in order to accomplish the goals.
I just want to interrupt you here, and excuse me for interrupting, because one of the things that they did was talk about for every exemption how much that would add on to the basic toll that everyone other than trucks and buses would have to pay. So for instance, if they gave an exemption to people or a discount to people, and it depended on the amount of the discount to people coming in from New Jersey, that would cost somewhere between 50 cents and $1 or $1.50. I don't remember the numbers, because they did it all for every single exemption that was asked for. I do want to address the question of Ubers and Lyfts, but I'll wait until then. I just wanted to point out that they had apparently been thinking at least about the impact of exemptions on the basic toll rate that people will have to pay. Thank you.
And I actually will provide some of that information, some of that context, because I want to definitely describe that, because I think it's a very critical point. So in terms of trying to create this balance, they said up front that the toll must change driver behavior and reduce congestion in the central business district, and that the goal is to keep tolls low, but it has to be within the range of the revenue target. And they made the point, as Alita was just alluding to, that essentially every discount and exemption that is offered will require higher toll rates overall, and we'll go into specific examples of that. And higher toll rates encourage more people to avoid the central business district and central business district toll. And that the recommended tolling structure should be within the bounds of what was studied with in the environmental assessment. So as we talked about at past meetings, the environmental assessment essentially provided a roadmap in order to understand what congestion pricing was going to be. So as I mentioned, they had to look into questions regarding all of those issues, so such as discounts by time period, what time of day should the standard rate apply, when should the overnight rate apply, would a rate in between the standard and overnight rate be beneficial, and what should the discount be for each time period. In terms of the offsets, should drivers be already paying to use tolled facilities get a discount or crossing credit or on the cost of the toll? And it was noted that larger discounts would shift the revenue burdens towards New Yorkers and less towards those coming from out of state. And they pointed to a significant like 8 to 10% change, I think, in terms of the burden being added to New Yorkers if there are more offsets given. Toll rates for buses, and there may be different types of toll rates offered for different types of buses, or perhaps they should even be exempt or discounted. And then the question of whether they should be charged once a day or every time they enter the zone. Again, these are all questions that the TMRB is going to have to address. Toll rates for trucks, should they pay a different rate than automobiles? And generally that's what is done in practice when dealing with highway tolling facilities. Should large trucks pay more for small trucks is a question they must address. Should trucks be charged once a day or every time they enter the zone? And it was noted, interestingly, that higher truck tolls increase diversions. Actually, that does make sense. And then tolls for government vehicles. And some of the statistics they provided to me that were fascinating were that there are 19,000 New York City government vehicles, 4,200 MTA vehicles, 2,200 Port Authority of New York and New Jersey vehicles, and then 2,700 other federal and state vehicles. So that's about getting close to about 30,000 official vehicles that they need to look at and consider how they will be tolled. And then whether there are certain types of government vehicles that should be exempt from the toll or receive some sort of discount, such as those providing public services, such as sanitation trucks. They need a plan for, as I said, for hire vehicles and other discounts and exemptions. So that was essentially what happened in the July meeting, and it set the table for the August meeting. And there was a lot of discussion at the July meeting that led to the following questions that would be then further discussed in August. It was, how would crossing credits affect the base auto rate for the central business district toll? How would different truck tolling structures affect the base auto rate? Could taxis and for-hire vehicles be subject to a per ride surcharge instead of a daily toll? Where do low-income drivers to the central business district commute from? And they were related questions about transit deserts, meaning places where people do not live within a half mile of a public transportation option. And then how could different tolling periods be modified to accommodate overnight workers, and how would that affect the base order rate? So there was one member of the TMRB who was very adamant about making sure that shift workers, those who work overnight and say they're working from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., they would potentially be prone to having to pay both coming in and going out because it would be on separate calendar days. So in the August meeting, they looked into all these issues. So I'll try to go through them one by one. So with crossing credits, they essentially came up with a calculation that said if those who are paying a crossing toll received a $4 credit, it would generally result in a $2 to $2.50 increase for over the baseline cost of that would otherwise be offered for tolling. If a $7 credit were offered, that would provide an across the board increase of $3 to $4 off of the base rate and a full $14 credit. So if, as you may know, if you're driving from New Jersey to New York and crossing the George Washington Bridge or the tunnels, it's about $14 to cross. So if an offset of that full $14 were offered, it would increase the base cost for all vehicles entering the toll zone being $8 to $9, or essentially that is what would bring that toll charge to that widely publicized $23 rate that has been mentioned many times.
Greg, before you go on to another category, just to note that people coming in from New Jersey, the toll is going to the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. It is not going to the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. It is not going to the City of New York. People coming in from, and that's where the congestion pricing is supposed to go to, is to the MTA for capital projects. People coming in from the other boroughs on the Henry Hudson Bridge or anything from Queens or Brooklyn, where there's a toll, that money is not going to Port Authority. It's going to the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, which is part of the New York City agency grouping. Is that right? So there are different sources of money or different directions that money is going to, and that in itself would seem to raise some questions. So whether we've all had discussions, or we've had discussions here about whether the MTA spends its money wisely, the Port Authority has decided to go into the real estate business, so it raises some questions about that too. And so there are some fairness questions that they're looking at as well. It's not that the money is all going to the same pot. And I also wonder, in terms of government vehicles, if the money is coming out of New York City's budget anyway, whether it's coming from the sanitation department and sanitation trucks, is that right, paying the toll and that money? So I don't even begin to understand the machinations of this.
Yeah, that would make little sense to me if they were charging other governmental entities for trips that are providing actual benefits to the public, such as providing services, sanitation, public transportation, and such. But one of the things they did note here, which surprised me, is that the higher the credits offered, the more truck diversions that would occur. I was trying to just make sense of that. And then,
well,
as we
that's
said,
why they're anticipating so much traffic on the Cross Bronx, pre whatever fixes the MTA has in mind. For Congressmember Torres's objections to it is that trucks will seek to bypass that part of Manhattan if they're able to go through Queens and go up over the Triborough Bridge or one of the other bridges into the Bronx and take the Cross Bronx to go over the Washington Bridge instead of staying in Manhattan or using Canal Street or one of the other avenues that they now use. So I think that's where the extra congestion and environmental issues would come from.
Yeah, but what surprised me was that the higher the credit, meaning that if it were offset entirely or to some degree, that it would create more truck diversions as opposed to more trucks being willing to continue doing what they're doing now and paying the toll because it wouldn't be that much more, the congestion fee, because it wouldn't be that much more if there was that offset. So that's why I was confused. I'm not sure.
I'm confused too, because I don't understand that either. Maybe they misspoke or something.
Maybe they did, but I went back 3 times and was hoping someone would ask the question to get clarification on that. What did make sense, though, as I alluded to before, is that the higher the credit, the more the burden of who pays
Yes.
the toll and shifting towards New York State and New York City residents. As far as trucks, some of the further information that was provided at the August meeting was that the toll multipliers for trucks, I'm just trying to understand my notes here. The change to the base order rate for everyone entering the central business district would vary based off of, depending on, given the likelihood that that a small truck would be charged something different than a larger truck. But limiting truck tolls to once per day would increase base tolls for everyone by 25 to 75 cents. And they basically, I think, were able to discover that 7 in 10 trucks that enter the central business district are only doing so once a day. So it is not a large number of trucks that would be doing it multiple times, but it does add up. For hire vehicles and taxis. So this was again, one of the more lengthy discussions that they had, and they provided a lot of really interesting data to essentially describe the diversion of New York City yellow taxis and how ridership on yellow taxis has remained relatively stagnant over the years, putting aside pandemic impacts, versus Uber and Lyft since 2015 when they were introduced, and how demand keeps on growing and the cost keeps on growing. So they are, the point was made that Ubers, while there are more New York City taxis in the zone than there are Ubers and Lyfts, Ubers and Lyfts are actually the ones who are generating much more of the ridership activity. I don't actually even know if that, I'm trying to recall whether that was in the zone versus total number, but it is an issue that yellow taxis are struggling the way that they are. And there's still, it's unclear to me, and Alita and I were talking about this earlier, as to why Uber and Lyft specifically could not be, wouldn't have to essentially pay in order to operate, and why they're not being charged congestion anything as part of this directly, as opposed to the likelihood that fees would be passed on to passengers.
Well, it's they also, just for a little more filler or fill in, is that they were talking about not charging the companies, Uber and Lyft, at all, that those companies, no matter how much money they're making, and they're making a lot, would not have to pay anything for congestion pricing. Instead, the once a day fee would go to the drivers who would be responsible. And in addition, there would be a per ride surcharge on passengers in the same way the below 96th Street charge is assessed against passengers or rides now. So for me, that I wasn't even sure I heard it correctly, because it raised a huge issue of why these companies are not going to have to bear any of the responsibility for the congestion that is being caused by their cars, and that will likely increase if you look at London.
Yeah, and some of the details that they provided were that in 2018, taxis and for-hire vehicles made up more than half of all the vehicles in the central business district. And they found that a daily toll would likely not be borne by the customers whose travel behavior congestion pricing is aiming to influence. And then, as I said, yellow taxi, green taxi, and black car trips have been in steady decline since app-based for-hire vehicles were introduced in 2015. And then since 2019, the cost per mile of app-based for-hire vehicles in the central business district have increased twice as fast as inflation, as opposed to yellow taxis, which have basically kept pace with inflation, but demand continues to grow for for-hire vehicles. And as opposed to taxis, which have stabilized at half of pre-pandemic levels. So this is one of the big challenges that they are trying to figure out. All right, then they were talking about low-income drivers and where they are coming from, and essentially 1.5 million people work in the central business district. Of those, 1.3 of those 1.5 million take transit, and 143,000 people drive. Of those who drive, 16,000-ish people live in low-income households with incomes under 50,000. As I mentioned, transit, the only transit desert, technically speaking, in New York City is in Breezy Point in Queens, though it was acknowledged that commutes are more arduous for those who technically aren't in transit deserts during certain times of day when transit service is more limited, especially during off-peak periods and overnight periods.
Their overnight period is short. As Craig mentions, it's 12 to 4, and it's every day of the week. There is no weekend break either. That's a short amount of time. But what struck me is that they seem to have no issue with people who are within a half-mile walk of public transportation. So that's 10 minutes at the least to get that half mile. They had no problem with people commuting 2 or 2.5 hours each way to get to wherever they're going in the central business district rather than using a car. That seems like an awful lot of time to be spent getting someplace. And when you think about Queens, the 7 stops in Flushing, which is halfway across the borough. I've taken the train to Coney Island. It takes an hour each way. And it takes an hour even to get to the train to the whatever the link is to JFK from the end of the A or the E. It's not even the end, I guess. So there are a lot of very lengthy commuting times that they seem to think are perfectly acceptable. Just want to bring that up. Sorry,
Yeah.
Craig.
No, that's fine. I'm glad you're able to provide this additional context. So essentially what they were trying to make the point that it is a very low number of low income drivers. So they said 7 in 10 low income drivers going to the central business district live in New York City. 5,200 come from outside of New York City, and about 1,560 low-income drivers to the central business district don't have direct access to transit. That's 0.7% of all low-income central business district commuters. So I think at least the facts point to there not being a lot of people who would be affected by that, in addition to the fact that you do have the mandate that those who are making under 60,000 are going to have essentially a cap to the amount that they would be able to be charged over the course of a month. But still, the TMRB has to figure out how to appropriately price things from that perspective. And then finally, the last thing, which also relates to, as I mentioned, those who are working overnight, how would those different tolling periods affect the base order rate? So they provided a few different examples of beyond that 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. period that has to be considered an overnight period, about how to perhaps widen it. And they were able to, as best as possible, do some research to come up with a figure of about 48,000 people who are at work within the central business district at 1 a.m. Though they noted there are many different industries that have late night shift workers. And while there were options to increase the extent of that off-peak period, it would increase costs for others throughout the day. But there were concerns about being charged to both enter and exit if arriving in one calendar day and leaving the next day, as I said. And one of the members made the point that in response to that discussion where the MTA staff was saying, well, people who leave at 6 a.m. are contributing to congestion in the peak hour, there was a discussion regarding how to identify drivers who are working overnight shifts that are leaving the zone at that time, and finding a mechanism to allow them to be charged at the lower overnight rate if they leave rather than enter the district at the peak period. So again, that's essentially a very high level overview of what was discussed. They don't have answers yet. They are going to be reconvening at some point, I would assume, within the next few weeks, given the first 2 meetings were about a month apart. And I assume they will be trying to tackle these questions, but it is a very complicated task that they certainly have. And then I just want to bring this home and talk about what all this means for us here in this task force, attending this task force meeting, and implications to Community District 8. of course, everything is going to be focused around whatever the toll rates that are decided upon are going to be, in terms of how that's going to impact congestion, and for those people who live in this district and cross over, and how they're assessed the tolls, how it may impact them personally. But clearly, as we've discussed all along, and as highlighted throughout these discussions, the more exemptions and credits and discounts that are offered, the more it's going to cost everyone to enter as a base toll rate. But there may very well be certain exemptions that as a community we feel need to be addressed in order to make sure that this is as equitable as possible, and that certain groups that may be penalized as just a matter of circumstance are going to are not going to be unduly harmed, or as some have mentioned before, unintended consequences perhaps. So that may be what we want to discuss as we try to digest all of this information. Alita, do you wish to add anything?
I do. One thing that Craig and I talked about earlier is the idea that people who are going into the zone for just a block or two to get on the 59th Street Bridge, or to go from the West Side Highway to the Lincoln Tunnel, are not really contributing to congestion and environmental pollution in the same way that people who are driving down to Wall Street or driving over to something else and spending much more time and gas in the zone might be. So is that something that is anyone is interested in raising? The other thing is, there is also, I think, a potential lawsuit from Rockland County, which is the same basis as the one from Staten Island, which is that they don't really have access to great public transportation, to trains. Staten Island people are already paying a toll. Rockland County doesn't have trains to the same extent of Westchester, Long Island, New Jersey, and should they be burdened with this extra toll? And the other thing that I want to mention is that there are so many requests for exemptions, perhaps because the toll seems so darn high to go into the zone for a lot of people. And even with a $60,000 income, and this is after tax dollars, two weeks of having to pay in order to get a discount or an exemption is to about $10,000 a year. That's what is that, 16% of their pre-tax dollars, but they're paying in after-tax dollars, so it's an even larger amount of money. That's huge. And I imagine there are people in this district and all over the city who are at that income level. It just seems so high, and yet this is what they're tasked with, and these are the numbers that they're looking at with all of the exemptions. So I'm just raising that because I'm just, well, you know, because I've said it, is that I'm just really troubled by the impact that this is going to have on people. But having said that, I guess I don't have anything else to add right now. There was one other thing that they said about tolls or discounts, but which has temporarily escaped me. It'll come back and then I'll mention it. So thanks for your patience.
All right, thank you, Alita. So let's now go to the public for comments. Before I acknowledge anyone who has raised their hand from the public, I do want to just offer anyone who is representing an elected official an opportunity to raise their hand if they wish to speak.
And again, we hope and have invited elected officials to come, because this is really important. And there certainly is a lot more discussion. There are a lot more editorials, a lot more articles, and all sorts of publications about it. So we hope that elected officials will come. There are not a lot of community boards that have been touching on this issue, certainly not to the extent that we have. I'd also like to caution everyone, we welcome, of course, your comments to the extent that you want to make them, but we ask that there not be generalized statements about the negatives of congestion pricing. That comments, if you can, be limited not just to what we were talking about, but to other ways potentially of having an effect on the Traffic Mobility Review Board or the Triborough folks.
Yes, and thank you for saying that. And I'd like to just reiterate that we've had numerous meetings in the past and we've had plenty of that discussion. I think it is clear where the various views of many of the community members on both sides lie, I think the intent of this task force was always to try to address issues as best as possible. And if we have the opportunity to weigh in an official capacity, that's what we're looking to do. And that's not to say that we have to make any recommendations tonight. But that if we could just try to keep it targeted, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, so let's move on to public comments. The first person with their hand up, and again, if you do wish to speak, you need to use the raise hand function under the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen. If you raise your hand manually or do anything else, we won't see it. So the first person with their virtual hand raise is Erica Burson. So if we can unmute Erica, please.
Thanks, Craig. I was actually at both meetings, and I was the first person to testify at the New York City Council Transportation and Infrastructure meeting last month. To say that they don't care about the opposition would be an understatement. And I am so incredibly concerned because the media is portraying this that everybody supports it, and there are thousands and thousands of people that don't support it, and I'm one of them. So I literally took a whole day off from work last month to be at the New York City Council meeting and the machinations I had to get through in order to speak at that. And then in the afternoon, I went to the Transit Review Board meeting. They don't care. The New York City Council members on that board, I think there were 3 people left after the MTA exited. They couldn't even be bothered to stay and listen to what the public thinks about it. The council members, there were maybe 3 at the time around 1:30 or 1 o'clock, and none of them were even paying attention when I was speaking. So to say that the goal now is to how do we improve the mess that is being made and that we will know, that ship has sailed. They are not listening. They are moving forward. I get Google alerts every day about congestion pricing. So like Alita, I've done a deep dive into this. I have sent letters to the editor in response to posts ad nauseum about this. And I'm a good writer because I've been doing it for 30 years for my job. They are not getting through. The opposition messaging is not getting through. By and large, that's because, and I rely on them to get around because I have a disease, but the fact that people, don't want to talk about the elephant in the room, that Uber and Lyft are supporting transportation alternatives, is a farce. So while I rely on that, and Craig, you talked about exemptions, the MTA is pushing for 0 exemptions hard on the Transit Review Board. They're pushing hard, and there's only 1 or 2 of the people on the board that are remotely even pushing back, and I have no idea where they're going to go, and I saw it with my own eyes. They are not listening to the public that opposes this happening. And so many people are going to get harmed. In addition to that, I sent Kevin a link to a really good Vice article that came out yesterday about it. So you can all see it in the chat, but I'm tracking this just about every day because of how negatively it's going to impact everybody. And let's say they get their wish, that they get all these cars off the road. How are they raising $1 billion a year? If you're not getting the toll money, how are you raising that $1 billion? And the answer to that question is it's going to go from 60th Street to 72nd to 86 to 96 to 125th, and the rates are going to go up and up and up. On top of that, this isn't even an MTA thing. The Department of Transportation should be overseeing this. And they have basically washed their hands because they don't want to get the negative feedback. The second meeting, so if you count July as 1 and August as 2, there was actually a representative from the DOT, and he just sat there like a deer in headlights, not being able to answer any questions with the 3 binders he had in front of him. So this should actually be a Department of Transportation initiative, because this is about the roads. But at the end of the day, what it is about money for the MTA, no more, no less. There is nothing in the MTA's mission and vision about congestion pricing that even mentions climate change or the impact on the environment. Nothing. There is nothing about climate change that is attached to this program. Zero from the MTA. So to use that as another crutch, they clearly think we're all stupid. So again, I will come back to what I've asked this committee each time I've joined the meetings. What is the goal of this? Because Craig, I appreciate all the work you've done. I know Alita's done a ton of work, but you basically just went over what was in the YouTube video, because I was at the meeting, and stuff that's on the website already. This that you guys have done, how many like, you know, how many, this is what we'd like to see happen, and how many of those have actually been responded to by our elected officials? Because now they're playing both sides of the coin. They all came out in support of it, but now they're all writing letters saying, oh, we support it, but these exemptions have to happen, knowing that those exemptions are not going to happen. And these are all people that I voted for as well. But the amazing thing about hopefully our continued democracy is that we need to be calling out these elected officials when they aren't effectively representing us on topics. You know, so 9 times out of 10, I might agree with them, but this 10th time is a really big deal. And I don't feel like this committee or CB8 has really represented people effectively in this.
It has been very frustrating, because we've made recommendations from the beginning about having a Manhattan representative, for instance, on the Transit Mobility Review Board, and there isn't one. We've made other recommendations that have not caught on with them, but we have to just keep trying. Our hands are kind of tied by what they're willing to do or who's willing to listen to us. And we've invited elected officials, whether they're here or not, says something. But I understand and share your frustration. And one question that they did not, you're absolutely right, you were there and I heard them as well, was that they did not deal with the question of what happens if the program is a huge success. Is it only going to be Ubers and Lyfts and trucks? And now with cargo bikes, the city hopes will take the place of a lot of these trucks. If they're not in the zone, then who is going to be paying all of this money that they need to raise to support the capital projects? Also, from an article that I read yesterday that someone sent me, they raised the question of what happens. Oh my gosh.
It was the Vice article I sent you.
It was, but they raised a point about, oh, never mind. The point about not, I know I sound like a loony guy, but the point about if the program's a huge success, where is the money coming from? That article talked about how it's not going to increase the number of buses or trains,
right,
make them faster. It is only about capital projects. So the hopes that people have that this will actually improve transit immediately is not there, because it can't be there. They're not
limited to where they can spend the money is what it is. And it's
That's right.
on capital improvements. So,
and that's also something that hasn't come up a lot at these TRMB meetings. I guess it doesn't have a place in their discussion, but it's also not something that people are focused on. And there's nothing that we could really do about that, because that's in the legislation. But people should just be aware of the issue that it's not going to increase the number of buses. It's not going to increase bus times. It's not going to add stops. It's not going to speed up the trains. It's not meant to do any of that. So do you have anything else you'd like to add, Erica?
Well, I would just like to respond a little as well. And one of the things that I think we always look to say, and was a point that we've made many times over, is, and you could point to other cities that have done it with congestion pricing, which is that ideally you would have a ramping up and increase of service to coincide with the actual implementation of it, to provide those who may be forced to shift modes and use transit to have more opportunities to do so and to be able to have faster trips. And that was done in London, for example, and other cities. And maybe it was because the environmental assessment essentially said that the capacity already existed in the system, or that, you know, some of our subway lines are already running at full capacity. It hasn't been done, but I think that's something that is sort of a PR loss for the MTA, because they certainly could have told a story by saying we are going to be increasing service to coincide with this, and they haven't necessarily done that. I think, as I've said before, we're the only game in town in terms of community boards that are trying to do something and trying to be heard. But the problem with community boards always is that we are advisory and we are a sounding board, and we are very grateful for our elected officials and city and agencies and state agencies that will consume whatever recommendations we have, but by no means will they listen to us. And we see this on a regular basis. Every month, every committee that passes things, routinely, it's not necessarily followed. The advice of the community board isn't followed. So I hear your frustration about that. When we put together these meetings and presentations, we have to assume that those who are in attendance haven't watched the TMRB meetings and may be coming to us for information, which is why, yes, largely I was essentially repeating the information that was provided there, but I like to do things from a fact-based perspective and to make sure that people are on equal footing in terms of the information they're provided. And if that's information that was provided publicly, just like the environmental assessment, that's how I like to present it, so that our meeting participants have a chance to be able to consume that as well. So the goal has always been for us to try to advocate for our community's needs with the recognition that this is happening. If you think they're not listening to us because they don't like what we have to say, imagine if we were to say something in opposition to congestion pricing. That's clearly not a starting point, given that it is the law of the land right now. So it's always been our mission to try to affect change as best as possible to try to address the issues. So I think we should move on to the next speaker. Thank you, Erica. And the next speaker is Barbara Williams.
Unmute. Okay. Hi. This is my first time joining, and I share Erica's frustration. I did put something in the chat. I didn't know if anyone saw it, but it was also to help me remember what my concerns, what I was interested in, because I did call my city council member, Julie Menon's office about this. And I got the impression that they were very nonchalant about it, because I live on 95th Street, East 95th Street. And sometimes I do take the West Side Highway to go to the Lincoln Tunnel, because I'm going to visit family in Maryland. So I'm wondering, am I supposed to pay congestive pricing just to go to a distance? Or sometimes I go out of town and my mode of transportation is Amtrak. So I get a taxi down to the Amtrak station, and that's it. So I was asking, I called Julie's office, and the guy who answers the phone was talking to me. He's like, well, just take the subway. Well, I'm 68 years old, and my luggage and my baggage, I cannot go up and down steps. I'm not 21 anymore. You know, I am pretty flexible, but I can't carry all that stuff up and down the steps. That's ridiculous. So with that, I wanted to know how far north, how far south is the zone extending on the West Side Highway and also on the FDR, because I go visit family twice a year out in Far Rockaway. I take the FDR to the Brooklyn Bridge, and I take Brooklyn straight through out to Far Rockaway. I don't get on the highway. So that's twice a year, you know? So I need to know information about this. I'm frustrated that this has come to this. So, you know, I jumped on because congestive pricing is something that I want to know more about.
All right, let me try to answer those questions.
Well, first, let me just say, welcome, and I'm glad that you're here and spread the word, because we want the public to be able to get information from us and see us as a resource, and for congestion pricing too. Go ahead, Craig, sorry.
I echo those comments as well. So let me try to, as briefly as possible, address those questions. So the toll zone is inclusive of 60th Street. So for
Right.
regular vehicles entering the Central Business District, which is defined as 60th Street and south, they will be
Right.
charged a toll. However, there are a few exceptions to that. One of which
What are
is
they?
the highway exception. So if they are interested in trying to address congestion that actually enters the internal street network of the Central Business District. So one of the exemptions that is part of the plan is if you are on the FDR Drive and you are not entering the street network south of 60th Street, meaning you are heading directly to the Brooklyn Bridge and over the Brooklyn Bridge.
Right. I would get on from 96th Street.
You will not be tolled for that trip. If you were to exit the Brooklyn Bridge exit and then go onto the streets of Lower Manhattan, you would be charged. But
Okay.
there is that exemption that allows you to essentially go to the Brooklyn Bridge and to the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, or El Carry Tunnel, as some
Okay. No, I'm going to cross the Brooklyn Bridge and down Flatbush. That's what I would do.
Right. That is not part of it. Now, in addition,
Okay.
the plan, and this has already been implemented, there
Okay.
are surcharges on for-hire vehicles and taxis. So one is a general congestion fee, and then for anyone entering a New York City yellow taxi south of 96th Street, excuse me, they are assessed as you enter the cab. Currently, I think it is a $2.50 surcharge. And those who do it for Ubers and Lyfts and other for-hire vehicles, I think it's $2.75. And then on top of that,
because I would be doing that from the 96th Street west side down to Penn Station.
Yes, so
that's when I am going away. But then there are times when I jump in my car and I take the West Side Highway to the Lincoln Tunnel because I need to go down I-95.
You will be charged for that.
I'm pretty sure.
I'm
pretty sure. Yes, I'm
as
pretty
once
sure.
you get
That's what I'm afraid of.
But I honestly don't want to comment on that because I haven't looked at that situation as much, because there are some.
Because the way I look at it, they just want us to stay in one location, or they're just controlling us to go how they want us to go. And, you know, that's like a freedom we're losing.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because that woman, the staff member at the MTA, compared congestion pricing and said that many states already have it, because in some states you can go on an extra lane on the highway and pay a certain amount of money to go in that extra, more sparsely populated lane, and said, well,
oh yeah, I know. In Maryland they do have an express lane, but that's only during rush hour.
Well,
that's only during rush hour.
They actually offer those down there. Those are known as either express lanes, sometimes they're high occupancy toll lanes.
Right,
variable price lanes that allow you.
But I've seen the arm down, which means you can, and we haven't opened it. Well, they also have that. Well, I know on the Long Island, out there on that expressway, they do have the HOV, but I don't see it as a toll the way it's proposed here in the city.
Right. And I think we're getting a little off topic by talking about those
I just mentioned it I mentioned it because I was
Yeah,
surprised.
she mentioned it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and that's not a criticism. I just don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
No, I only mentioned it
Those are
because-
different examples of tolling approaches that have been implemented elsewhere, and those you can argue are more inequitable. They have a nickname known as Lexus lanes because those who can afford to pay, and
Yeah, true.
those
True.
rates are variable.
Those who
So
don't want to wait, nowadays no one wants to wait, no one wants to sit in traffic. But how far does this extend? How far north? Does it go further than 60th Street or 60th Street
It's the
and below? That's
It's the
it.
northern side of 60th Street, so the north
Okay.
side of that street, all the way down to the tip of Manhattan,
Right.
excluding
Okay.
FDR Drive and the West Side Highway. Other than that, that whole area of Manhattan is covered by this.
yeah, I was going to say, if you want, you can go back to videos of our past meetings, and we describe that in detail. It may be helpful.
Okay, well, it's good. I mean, I was going through my email and I saw this one tonight and I said, I'm going to jump on this meeting tonight, and learn something, because I can't get anything from Julie's office. I really miss Ben Kalos because he would keep everybody informed, but I don't get anything. I don't get an email.
Well, you can sign up for your legislators, but it's also a state issue. It's not a city issue. The city council
Okay,
has not been involved in the decision making or any of this.
okay,
Including appointments to the Transit Mobility Review Board. It's all been part of the state. But you should, if you're interested, go back to our past meetings, or at least you could look at our past resolutions and get a sense of the kinds of issues that the public has raised or that have been raised at this level, and the letters or the
Okay.
resolutions that we've sent to the officials.
okay.
But thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Thank
for
you.
your
Thank you.
comments and for
Okay.
joining us tonight.
Okay.
All right. Next, we have someone who has been to pretty much all of our meetings, I think. Andrew Fine.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, I'm the unofficial 51st member of the community board or whatever. I just wanted to thank you and Alita for your tireless recapping of this travesty in motion, or not in motion, and really wanted to double down on Erica and Barbara's comments. Thank you so much for your participation. Sometimes it gets kind of lonely out here as the member from the public. I'd like to point out, there's no elected official in Manhattan, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, that actually backs the citizens who are against congestion pricing. And I know that we make up this really tiny minority of 46% of New Yorkers that actually are in a household that has a car. And I'm sure that by the fact of our absolute minority, that we should be persecuted to the max. But I really, really wish that we had some support. I keep hearing the word equity. Equity here, equity there, everything's got to be equitable. This is literally dividing Manhattan in half. We're building a wall. This is like our modern day Cross Bronx Expressway. We're also building a financial wall. There are the haves and the have-nots. And this divide is growing wider and wider. And this is just a massive wedge, because you're either going to be somebody extraordinarily wealthy who really doesn't give a hoot about $23, $20, or whatever it will be, and the guy who's got to come in and tend your door, and coming from Long Island, he can just basically go fly. It's really, really sad. I'm not quite speechless, but I'm really on the borderline of being speechless. I know that's a rare state for me. I just want to point out that at the end of the day, our transportation policy for the last 10 years has been dictated by a minority that's anti-vehicle, and they're backed by vehicle lobbies. It's extraordinary. Transportation Alternatives, one of their biggest donors, and I'm sure it's at least $1 million over the last 5 years, has been Lyft. I mean, they're literally saying we want transportation alternatives, but you are heavily funded to the tune of high 6 or at least low 7 figures by a car share app. Another big donor is DoorDash. And you wonder, why do they keep fighting to shrink the streets? And at the end of the day, it's special interests. Special interests have been driving this. I feel like the vast majority of New Yorkers want streets to be free and uncluttered. And congestion pricing claims that it may reduce congestion by 10% south of 60th Street. Of course, it'd be worse for our neighborhood. You know, we all know it. But if they cut congestion by 10%, but they cut the number of traffic lanes on 3rd Avenue by 40%, are they going to come back and say, this just didn't work? We need to charge more money to get into Lower Manhattan. I mean, it's ridiculous. I'm just saying the priorities here. I know, listen, at the end of the day, at this point, I don't want to concede defeat, but I almost, people aren't waking up, or they're just starting to wake up and it's too late. And I feel that people really have to suffer the consequences. It's sad, but if you don't pay attention to what government is doing, government will do whatever it wants to do. And that's exactly what's happening right now with the DOT. The DOT is in the greatest land grab since Robert Moses. Udonis Rodriguez is literally
And
the
Andrew,
modern day. I'm sorry. Am I off topic a little bit?
a little
I'm
bit.
sorry. You get where I'm going with this. It all
Yes,
seems to be in the
we
same
do.
purpose, to shrink the streets, to kill private car ownership. And at the end of the day, we end up beholden to rental car apps, rideshare apps, the get-arounds of the world that DOT just unilaterally decided to reserve parking spaces for their rental car business. I just want people to look deeper, dig deeper, and realize who's really steering the ship here. And it's not us. It's not CB8. It's not us concerned citizens. We're being ignored. We're in an echo chamber. And despite, for instance, when they had the hearings and they had 16,000 comments and 13,000 of them approximately were negative, just going through emotions. So I'm sorry this is happening, but I really thank you, Alita, and I thank Craig, and I thank all the people that really care for participating. I just wish it was more people.
Well, you're
Thank
right. There is an intersection of cause and effect, and we don't know what will happen here. We could see some things that have happened on bridges that have been told, or on streets that get more crowded, but there are different philosophies at play and different intersections. And unfortunately, we are in, or fortunately for some people, I suppose, we're in an experiment right now. Nevertheless, we have to keep trying and asking for the things that matter to this community, or making the point that these things matter to the community. We need to be on the record. We need to have our voice heard, even if they are not focusing on it. Maybe at some point they will, but we can't just throw up our hands and walk away, nor can we just turn our backs, because you're right, for us and for CB7 and for CB11, and the chair of CB11 has come to some of our meetings, there are issues directly as a result of our not just proximity to, but our adjacency, if that's a word, to the zone. And we don't know what's going to happen. We're told nothing. We're told that there are ample parking spaces and ample garages, but we'll see what happens. We'll see within the new cargo bike approach that they want to take exactly what will happen. There's been a lot of theories expressed
True.
here.
And a lot of us may have seen that memo or plan that came out by the DOT today to basically market rate or surge price parking spots on the avenues, even on the side streets. They are already planning for phase 2 of the extinction of private car ownership. And it's sad. And but on the plus side, at least you guys saved me about $200 worth of therapy for just being able to vent here. Thank you very
The
much.
tip jars on your way out. But
Okay.
Craig, forgive me for saying this, but you should certainly go to the Transportation Committee meeting and raise those issues because that's more appropriate for over there.
I'll be
Oh,
there
he will.
tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
Next
Andrew.
week, thanks, Andrew. Always good to see you. And thanks everyone from the public for coming and for speaking. So let's go to Tommy Loeb.
Let me unmute myself. Thank you for doing this. I come to you as a visitor from Community Board 3. I live on the Lower East Side, and we are totally within the congestion pricing zone. And one of the things you mentioned were unintended consequences. And I want to alert you because the MTA has been very careful not to mention the unintended consequences of congestion pricing. And I'll give you the first example. We are an environmental justice community, the Lower East Side, which means we have a high proportion of low-income people and people of color who live adjacent to the FDR Drive, okay? And any of you who come down here now, we've also been the victim of losing 1,000 mature trees and the total destruction of East River Park at a cost of $2 billion for a very poor and failed resiliency plan. But the unintended consequences which we're facing is, and the MTA admitted this at the city council hearing, is that our air pollution from 10th Street to the Brooklyn Bridge will actually increase as an effect of congestion pricing, meaning that a community that already has high asthma rates, high COVID death rates, will actually not benefit from congestion pricing, but actually suffer from congestion pricing.
Well, could you explain why that is? I'm
Well,
not
because
sure.
exactly what you just heard. The free zone in Manhattan on the east side will be the FDR Drive all the way to the Brooklyn Bridge and only the Brooklyn Bridge. So they are pushing more. They already acknowledge they're going to have more cars than already exist on the FDR Drive. And anybody who has used it southbound or northbound during rush hour knows that it's already at capacity, okay? So putting more cars on the FDR Drive will naturally result in more air pollution from, and they acknowledge this in their environmental assessment. They say that the Lower East Side will have worse air pollution under this plan. And the MTA at the city council hearing also admitted they're going to be winners and losers. The winners are in parts of the current region, the metropolitan region. Yes, pollution will go down. But in other areas of the metropolitan region, including the Cross Bronx, including parts of Fort Lee, New Jersey, including other parts, pollution will actually go up. So this is an example of a plan which is being done backwards. It really is the MTA, rather than doing what we used to have a commuter tax. We've had regional taxes for mass transit, but this way, they found an easy way to get through the legislature because, and this is what we suffered with East River Park and why you don't see any environmental groups or any legislators stepping up. As soon as you throw the word environment into the plan, everybody runs the other way because they're afraid of opposing a plan, even if it's a bad plan. And that's one of the problems. So that's why, by the way, litigation is the only thing that the MTA is paying attention to. For example, right now, they admitted, Carl Weisbrot admitted that they're negotiating with New Jersey. And he said, because New Jersey has for those of you who haven't looked at it, you should look at the New Jersey litigation. It's incredibly thorough and very good. And the MTA, I think, knows they have a problem. So right now they're negotiating with New Jersey about how to address the issue of credits, as we said, for the Trans-Hudson crossings. But as we also heard, every time they give a credit, it's going to go up for somebody else. And we also are a NORC community, which means the Lower East Side is a naturally occurring retirement community. We have probably one of the highest ratios of elderly in the community. A lot of them use Hospital for Special Surgery, Sloan Kettering, Mount Sinai, Columbia Presbyterian. They can't use mass transit, a lot of them. Some of them use vehicles, and now they're going to be charged every time they go to a doctor or go to an appointment at a hospital. And the other thing is, people don't realize the credit they're talking about giving for people who earn under $60,000 has to be deducted at the end of the year from your income taxes. You have to pay it up front, which means that somebody could have to lay out $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 before they file their taxes, and they get a refund. And this argument of credits and reductions is ridiculous. In London, those who live in the zone get a 90% reduction in the fee. In Staten Island right now, if you come across the Verrazano Bridge, you get a reduction in the cost of the toll. If you go over the Marine Parkway Bridge and you live in the Rockaways, you get a reduction in the toll of the Marine Parkway Bridge. So those of us who live in the zone, and by the way, I'm not even talking about the economic hit on our community. Chinatown, those businesses already say that they're toast. They're going to be gone because they can't afford, for example, the restaurants. If you get deliveries, you get a vegetable delivery, you get a linen delivery. Every one of those deliveries is going to pass their cost on to the consumer and the businesses. And who's going to pay an extra $23 to come into Chinatown for a meal or to go shopping when there are other options? So I won't even talk about the economic. The most serious one, though, is that unfortunately, the citizens of this, particularly Manhattan, and we have the same problem. Now, one of our elected officials is willing to come out and speak up against or to support the community. The only thing that's getting attention is citizen lawsuits. And I think, unfortunately, there may have to be a coalition of people in Manhattan, not community boards, but people who form coalitions and get together to sort of get our story on the books. Because right now, as I said, New Jersey's getting attention. The Bronx made a deal. Whether you agree with the deal or not, they cut a deal. And so they're at, I might not agree with that. But right now, Manhattan has gotten zip and gotten nothing from their elected officials. And the community boards are hamstrung in what they can accomplish. And I'm here to say that those of us on the Lower East Side are looking at litigation, and it is not impossible for others to get together, just the way they have in New Jersey. In New Jersey, they have the good fortune of having the governor and the legislature funding the litigation. But it may not necessarily be that expensive, and it may be the only recourse that works.
Well, I thank you very much for coming. It's very worthwhile to hear from you because you are not in this community. You are not in an adjacent community. You are downtown and subject to all of the benefits or negatives that come with congestion pricing. It's very interesting to hear about the FDR Drive and about what's going on in Chinatown. As a concern, this community board has raised the issue of people coming in to use our world-renowned hospitals and having to pay that kind of fee on top of being ill or being disabled. It's like salt in the wound. Their definition of disability is not nearly expansive enough. If you need to be able to get a placard for someone who has an acute injury or an acute illness, you may not have time to get a placard, but while you're being treated, but you may still be subject to all of those tolls. Small businesses have been a concern. I co-chair along with Valerie Mason, who is here and has her hand raised, the Small Business Committee, and their concerns. And Matt Bauer, who's the head of the Madison Avenue Bid, has spoken about the potential negative effect on small businesses of this kind of toll. But it's really also eye-opening opening to hear from you about this and to understand and hear your perspective. And I think it's unfortunate, regardless of where you stand, there are always issues that other community boards have not taken it up, much less elected officials. Is your council member Carlina Rivera or Chris Marte?
We have both, and both have run from this issue like all the other legislators in Manhattan.
Have you spoken to?
They were at the city council hearing, and they even asked some good questions, but there's no follow-up and there's no leadership in trying to get opposition. As you've said here, getting opposition organized is not an easy job, and it's not an easy job borough-wide. And when you have no help from elected officials, it makes it even harder. So as I said, right now, the only thing that's gotten the MTA's attention is litigation, because this environmental assessment is filled with holes, and there are new rules governing the environment in New York State, including a constitutional amendment which guarantees a clean environment. We also have new laws involving environmental justice communities like ours. The MTA, as people said, is trying to keep this issue focused on, as I said, this issue of, quote, the environment. And as soon as you use that word, it gives you a label which people don't understand is not always a good label. As I said, we lost 1,000 mature trees for a resiliency plan, which is not going to work. And and then people talk like today, Gail Brewer. I'm just going to say, I'm going to name a name. Gail Brewer today made a statement about the need for an urban forest. Well, Gail Brewer was the borough president when we appealed to her about the loss of 1,000 mature trees.
I know there's a lot of controversy about that park and the resiliency. And it's unfortunate that these kinds of environmental effects happen, or environmental destruction, if you will. But have you contacted your state officials or your congressman?
We've been, as I'm saying, we are, in fact, we were trying to plan a town hall, and all of a sudden they've all backed out.
Oh, well, that's
in other words, they're trying to keep this issue as low key as possible. They're depending on the media. For example, if you read the editorials and the press, the city and the MTA are in full form. They are using every opportunity they can to push this plan, using, again, a lot of false information and not providing people with the full story.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
And thank you for doing this, by the way.
Well, it's an important issue, and it's been important for years. But thank you very much for your ideas and your perspective on this. And please keep coming to our meetings, and send your brethren and your friends and colleagues and relatives down there, because the more steam power there is, maybe the more someone might listen. You have to just keep trying. Thank you. Let's go to James Goldman.
James, you should have received the prompt to unmute.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Technically a little behind the 8 ball. I thought this was a really good meeting. I want to thank Mr. Andrew Fine and Tommy Loeb for really illuminating how to solve some problems here today. I come in from a 30,000-foot perspective, and if this is a non-binding group, the community boards, at the end of the day, who would attend something that's non-binding or non-influential, because it doesn't seem like the community board people are listening to this. So you're automatically self-selecting a certain group. Both these gentlemen are really bright, and they have great ideas. But this community board doesn't seem to be able to get them there. I'd like to put out it seems like Mr. Fine is on the opposite side of the coin of this thing called transportation alternatives. I'd love to know the statistic of the members of transportation alternatives and what constitutes a member and where they live versus the number of people. I live on the Upper East Side, Community Board 8, who own vehicles in Manhattan. I'll bet the numbers of people who have the money to own a car in Manhattan blows away the number of people in transportation alternatives. It's probably a fairly woke left group ecologically. I'm a Sierra Club member. I love ecology. I own an oyster farm. But I love my car and I believe in equality of usage of transportation, as Mr. Fine does. But there's no way to organize it off of this board. No one started with a poll. It seems like there were about 60 people on. I would have loved to have known how many people had a car, how many people actually lived in the board, who's for and who's against. Then what could happen if the alternatives were set up correctly on the chat board? I could reach out to Mr. Fine or Mr. Loeb and create community. Are you with me? Andrew, sounds like we're on the same team. How do we get together off of this and create a Facebook website and get 40,000 Manhattan property owners who all own cars? And they can be people of modest means down at Tommy Loeb's area, and they can be rich as hell people on the Upper East Side, but they vote. And these councilmen will then be aware that car owners have votes. And car owners buy expensive vehicles or inexpensive, and they also pay a lot of salaries of parking lot attendants. Okay, and they also supporting the real estate industry that gets to build 100 stories up for maybe doing a few floors of underground parking, which is now eliminated. I think this is really politics 101. And I tried to text into the chat box. I've been on other things like this. I wanted to know if anybody knew a car owners organization that was the counterpoint to transportation alternatives. Somebody, not AAA, but somebody who represented city owners on very much subjects like this, because I think there's tens of thousands of them. They're just poorly organized. And those people are not going to sit on one of these things and listen to everybody talk for 15 minutes. They're not. This is kind of the power aspect of voting and getting a hold of a councilman is the only way this moves us forward.
Well, I have a suggestion that, and listening to what you were saying, James, is that if anyone is interested in sharing contact information, you could put yours in the chat and ask Kevin from the CB8 office to share it around, and maybe you can build a community and you can get voices heard.
I'd love to do that, but that's an extra step. And you will up and down on that. I've been in a million different groups, okay? And having you know what it always takes? Leadership. And the two of you running this as chair are extremely bright and amazingly patient with everybody. I don't know where they gave you your angel hat, but you're amazingly good at it and you're really knowledgeable. But, we're all a bunch of crazy people. You got to manage us like we're kids. Okay, these chats shouldn't go on more than 120 seconds. Then you cut them off. And then it's exciting and it moves along. And I could chat and ask Mr. Fine, hey, Mr. Fine, I'm Jim at blank, blank, blank. Let's get a hold of this. Do you know anybody? If you're creating these stages of checks that Kevin Wu is going to have to go over at the end and see that James Goldman wanted to get a hold of Andrew Fine, we're going nowhere, friend.
No, that's not what I mean. I mean, now you could put your name and address in the chat and Kevin will circulate that, not for him to go over and do more work at the end of the meeting, because that's not what I'm talking about. The other thing is that we want to hear from the public. we
I-
can't cut members of the public off, nor do we want to, because this is an opportunity for people from the public to be heard and maybe for their voices to culminate in a resolution or in some letter from the community board to the Transit Mobility Review Board and the MTA and the mayor and the governor and all of our elected officials. And that's what we're here to
Your
try
policy,
to do.
or is that the policy of anybody running a community board Zoom?
Excuse me?
Is that your personal policy?
No, it's not. It's the policy of the community board.
Anybody
And I
can get
believe,
on this thing and talk forever.
well, we
We-
don't
we-
encourage talking forever, and we do encourage people talking about the relevant topics. But this is a forum for the public, and therefore the public is entitled to speak and say what it would like to, just as you're doing right now, as Andrew did, as I've done at other meetings that I'm not chairing, as Craig has done. It's an opportunity for people to be heard.
Not unlimited. I've
You
been
know,
on.
and we've in the past
Limited
limited,
these things more efficiently.
we've in the past limited speaker times, and we do that at our full board meetings. And as Alita said, we try to at committee meetings provide people the ample opportunity to do it, but if the need exists, we will enforce time limits. So maybe we should do that now since you're suggesting it. So thank you for your comments, and let's move on.
Okay.
And
we've got-
we all like the idea of shorter meetings.
So I know you're next, Valerie, but is it all right with you? Can we just go to the members of the public, Evelyn, David, and Matthew Collins, who have not spoken yet? Craig, up to you.
Yeah, I think that's what
Hi.
we would generally
Hi.
do.
Thank you, Valerie.
Hello,
Evelyn, go ahead.
Valerie. Hi, how are you, Valerie? Okay, I just want to say I actually gave testimony. I was the second person of the public that gave testimony at the 8/17 meeting in front of the council. The MTA basically are a bunch of numbers people, and all they know are numbers, and all they did was spout numbers. However, they gave a glowing report on the health of the MTA. Ridership is up, everything is great, the cars are cleaner, they're buying new cars, and I'm sitting there going, and we need congestion pricing. Why? What? Okay, that was my instinctive first reaction. And I was also sitting next to a professor from Stuyvesant, who's this brilliant guy. I did not hear his testimony. I had to run because I had to close a tennis site. But any case, in the afternoon, they actually got me on. They got me on. So having said all of that, too bad Liz Kruger is not here tonight to defend her position. Okay, she talked about getting the line below 60th Street. The stanchions on Park Avenue are hideous. They are disgusting. They are horrible. That is a landmark street. This is New York City. That is Park Avenue. They should be ashamed of themselves, which they're not. They don't care. Nobody cares. I thought we were going to have something on the corner. You know, when you come across the George Washington Bridge, there is a thing up above, but it used to be a little thing on the side. They can catch the cars. Having said that, I called Landmarks. My friend from Stuyvesant, now friend, told me, call Landmarks. I called. I got through to, I'm not sure if there's a woman running Landmarks, but somebody called me back. I have her name written down. She said when they heard about what they were going to put up, Landmarks went nuts. And they fought them off and fought them off. Now, this is a couple of years ago, and they couldn't get anywhere with it. So, having said that, you know, I don't know. The community board should major outcry in a landmarked area. That's just one little tiny thing.
You know,
But when I was giving my, sorry?
I'm sorry, Evelyn.
When I was,
No, I was
Okay,
just going
back
to say,
to
I was
the-
just going to say, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, that this is what happened with those 5G towers on the landmarked or the historic districts on Madison Avenue and the side streets and Fifth Avenue, is that we did raise the issue, as other people did as well, of going to landmarks. So it's interesting that you say that. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. I mean, if you guys went to Landmarks also, maybe you know, you never know. I don't know. Okay, so anyway, I did have that conversation. So on talking to the city council, I started, of course, I get on to municipal parking lots, right? In the outer boroughs, my suggestion, and their eyes popped open. Okay. The man in front of me who's on the council, I don't know his name. He just kept saying, keep going, right? And I said, in the outer boroughs, you can use Easy Pass in these things. People will hop on the subways. You won't have you cut down on the cars and the pollution, etc. I said, and anywhere and everywhere in New York City where there's an open spot, of which there are several hundred, probably not 100, but there are several spots open where they could do little garages. Anybody that thinks that they're going to plenty of space in garages for cars to park, of the cars coming into Manhattan, they're nuts. These parking lots are filled at 6 o'clock in the morning already, and we haven't even. So, it's really really bad. Which brings me to our point of so Andrew Fine, was it Andrew who talked of supercharging charging parking places? I haven't heard that one. That's terrifying to me. Okay, we need parking passes. We need parking passes. Period. We need parking passes. If nobody's going to do anything for anybody in this city, maybe the community board, and I don't know what it's going to take. Kevin, who's our councilman? Keith Powers. He might not be opposed. I don't know. So what is this supercharging parking places? Do you know anything about that?
Well, that's part of the DOT's plan to reassess the use of curb space.
Right. I think you may be referring to smart curbs, and this is a pilot program that they are looking to test out first on Columbus Avenue on the Upper West Side before potentially expanding it. That would provide essentially curbside management using technology. So
what does that mean? Does that mean move your car or we're going to ticket you?
No, it probably means that they will have variable fees and different types of zones to promote different uses to try to address
oh my God.
management. I don't want that's not a topic for this meeting. As you know,
I know.
And I am sure that at some point in time we will have a detailed presentation on any potential expansion of that into our district. But at this point, we have not heard anything. And as far as I know,
okay, all right. It's just a fast question that shocked me. But we do need parking passes. I don't know how it could be arranged. I don't even care anymore. We just need parking passes. Okay. I think it's outrageous, completely unfair. The cars right now, the traffic right now in the middle of the day on 62nd Street, they must be doing construction down lower on 62 near the drive because it's been completely packed going to the FDR, starting on Park Avenue, actually, which is completely surprising to me. And coming off on 61st Street today and 60th Street, completely packed with cars going west. So I don't know what's going on, but, or people are back from school vacations and everybody's back in town and they're driving in. Wait till all that stuff disappears. And as the first person said, what happens when there are no cars and they don't reach their toll numbers? I mean, seriously, if they don't, they cannot charge $50 to go into the zone. And another thing, there aren't that many cities in the world that have congestion tolling pricing. I think Singapore does, or it's not Tokyo, it's Singapore, London, and us, and maybe Sweden.
It's two cities in Sweden, Milan, London, and Singapore, but they're different and they have different goals. They're not revenue, at least not London is not a revenue producing. The goal is not to produce revenue. And they have had some consequences of that have caused them to start another zone for the environment and also to reassess what they're doing there in London with respect to the prevalence of Ubers and Lyfts right now in the congestion zone. But they don't have the residents. It's different.
So the Ubers and the Lyfts caused the problem in the beginning in New York City. I mean, added severely to the problem. And now we're paying for it. Thank you very much, MTA and our elected officials. Thank you very much. Who have vested interest, by the way, probably somewhere in their, they bought into the stock and they're making billions, as usual. Gee, if you look under the covers, what are you going to see? Okay, so I don't want to make the accusations. I'm just putting it out there. That might be something that's going on. Gee, I wonder. You know, when you really dig down, anyway, it's too bad, again, Liz Kruger wasn't here, because she really needs to hear from people that are highly intelligent, have worked out every single angle as to how to get around, to make things better. And this is not making things better. It's just not. It's going to make it horrendous. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. And thank you for being, I know you were, Valerie, I think was at that meeting also, and I had to leave. So anyway, at the MTA meeting. And I was totally shocked by the fact that they are completely rigidly numbers people, totally numbers people. They have it's completely rigidly. It was, I didn't realize it was that bad, but it is. So, real eye opener. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. Before we go to Matthew, I just want to mention that ever since I was, I think, at a transportation committee meeting, or maybe it was one of ours, about the number of people that cover up their license plates, I can't help seeing how many license plates are covered by plastic or have digits or letters blocked out. And there is no mention of how they're going to deal with people who evade the toll in that way, because they're not as infrequent as I had previously thought. Anyway, having said that, Matthew Collins.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. Yeah, I noticed that I drive in the city periodically. And I drive out on the highways quite a bit. The number of fake and damaged license plates is an issue. The numbers have gone up significantly. But I want to go back just a moment. You know, the TA published, I'm not a member of Transportation Alternatives, by the way. When I say transportation, I'm talking about the MTA. You know, they published the list of, you know, potential discounts and exemptions, 122 categories of, you know, car owners or people in, you know, that meet various criteria in theory. And, you know, Craig earlier said, you know, he wanted a process that is as equitable as possible. And the truth is, all of these exceptions are not equitable, right? Every penny that is rearranged is inequitable to the people who are paying for it. And it creates more classes of people who will be more disaffected and not part of the community. I'd like to suggest, as a car owner, as a pedestrian in the zone, as a member of CB8, that I'm really tired of a certain amount of lawlessness that exists in this city, all the way from defaced license plates to poor driving to impossible, dangerous pedestrian situations because of the crowding, but also the expense to me is going to be several $1,000s a year based on sort of my estimate of usage and the current guesses as to tolls. I think we've got a situation, as was mentioned earlier, you know, what can CB8 do? I would actually like to suggest that CB8 strongly pass a resolution to say that there should be no exemptions from pricing, 0 of them, because all of that is inequitable. Additionally, CB8 should encourage the expansion of the toll zone into all of CB8, because CB8 is going to be directly affected by the enormous overflow of traffic that's going to have a panic once they hit 61st Street, 62nd Street, and have to then either going to find parking uptown or try to find a way to get out of town. At the same time, I think CB8, again, this is a done deal. The purpose of the program is to reduce traffic in the zone and raise money for the MTA. I think CB8 should take advantage of this and reduce traffic in CB8's zone. And additionally, pass a resolution that really is a vote of no confidence for the elected officials who have let this get this far without better thinking. So that's my 2 cents. I know that's not a popular position, but we are at the point, I think, with the entire proposal that the elected officials have to be held to account for this. And we have voted for some of the people who are making these decisions. They have to know that this is an untenable position and that they are not going to get a vote. And I think a strong statement from CB8 about the untenability of the political decisions being made would go a long way toward that.
Well, I appreciate your comments. We do have a resolution from 2019 when the plan wasn't very detailed in support of congestion pricing. So that's where we are as a board, and that's one of the reasons that we have been working hard to come up with resolutions dealing with specific areas of the congestion pricing plan that might have a negative impact on our community, occasionally the city at large, so that we could potentially have some impact on the things that will affect us, because that's really what we want to be able to do.
Right. I would like to see CB8 reiterate that and perhaps make it stronger.
I'm not sure what you mean, make what stronger?
The resolution you mentioned earlier, or adopt it to be a specific, a statement of no confidence in the elected officials who are pushing this through.
Oh, well, that's the opposite of what had happened. What we had was a resolution in favor of congestion pricing.
Actually,
Right.
no,
Well, I am in favor of congestion pricing, and it is going to negatively affect me in all of my car habits. I'm hoping it's going to positively affect me in my walking around the city.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we haven't actually passed a resolution in regards to the current congestion pricing plan. We passed something prior to this latest efforts in support of the concept of congestion pricing. And then we've had many discussions in the past, and we've had attempts to vote on the plan itself and to oppose it, and they have not gone anywhere with the full board. So that ship has basically sailed in terms of us taking a position on congestion pricing, and that's why I emphasized that we're trying to do something based off of where we are now and where this discussion is headed and where the policy is headed.
Right. So I think the best thing to do is for CB8 to get CB8 included in the zone, so it doesn't bear the brunt of all of the people who are trying to get out of the zone or not enter the zone. That is going to be a terrific influence on the quality of life in the CB8.
Yes, we are aware that being at the edge of the zone raises a lot of issues, and we've had resolutions, we've had letters making specific recommendations or reiterating our deep concerns about that. Where we know that there are potentially very large problems.
All right, thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Let's, I know Valerie has been very patient.
Very patient.
Well, I actually have been very patient, but I'm also very keenly listening to all the people that have come today. I've spoken to a lot of them on the phone. The first time I've seen Tommy Loeb in Vision, I'm glad he came. I was part of the group that took the day off from work and went to the city council hearing and then the Transit Mobility Review Board in the afternoon. I just want to say about the city council meeting, when I testified, it was very interesting in the beginning when the council people were actually there asking the questions. They were very interested in all the exemptions that might be available for their constituents, and they've also been tricked into this exemption sort of hamster wheel that they're never going to get off of. And it was the tack that the MTA took that morning, and I apologize, I'm suffering from a very severe cold. The tack that the MTA took that morning was, hey, we didn't really ask for congestion pricing. If you have a problem with this, you should be talking to your state legislatures. Like, we're only doing what the law says that we have to do. And to Evelyn's, David's point, they were basically really lauding where they were financially. And it almost sounded as if they didn't even need it, and that they were just following through on what the state legislature said they had to do. And I was like, wow, this is a really smart PR position that they're taking right now, because they were like, well, you know, we don't know what the, basically pushing the exemptions off on the mobility review board, saying, you know, it's whatever they say, you know, we don't know. And Selvina Brooks Powers, I have to laud her. She was doing a great job of trying to keep the hearing in check and questioning them, because, you know, her district in particular is a transportation desert. And to Craig's point, at one of the mobility review board hearings, the MTA made the point that every New Yorker is within 1 mile of a bus stop or a train station. And quite frankly, the entire mobility review board chuckled when they said that. Because, yeah, you may be within 1.5 miles or 1 mile of a bus stop or a train station, but how are you getting there? And once you get to that bus stop or train station, how long is it going to be before that bus or train comes? And how many of them do you have to take to get to your destination? And I was really impressed by some of the members of the Mobility Review Board who questioned the MTA and said, to Craig's point, you know, you're telling my workers, Samuelson, who represents the transit authority workers, said, you're telling my workers not to take their cars in from Queens or the Bronx or wherever. But what's the upgrade in the service? How frequently, when I have a guy who's coming in at 9 o'clock at night and going home at 4 a.m. in the morning, and the response was, oh, well, we're turning all the diesel buses into electric buses. And Samuelson was very quick to point out, you just said you weren't increasing the service. And he was like, yeah, right. I didn't say there was any increase in service. So he was then like, well, what are my guys going to do between the time that, you know, we put this in place and, you know, you're going to increase the service? But there was never a promise of increased service. And so, you know, the whole sort of house of cards falls down, whatever you want to say. Emperor has no clothes on. The MTA is not hiding the fact. When Selvina Powers asked about what upgrades there were going to be, they had zero to answer to that question. They talked about, you know, the disabled, and they actually were very proud. And they said, we're very proud to say that by 2055, we may get to the point where we have elevator access at all of our stations. Like, there was audible laughter in the room. And they said, we're very proud to say that we will have this. And when you're in a hearing room and you're hearing all this as the public, you're sort of like, there were only 6 council people in the room listening. When I got up there to testify, I was like, and people who were testifying, God bless them, maybe, you know, a lot of them, it was their first time. They had no inkling that the city council really has no authority or input on the exemptions or anything related to this. And so my point to the chair of the committee was, I want you all to pass a resolution asking the MTA and your friends in the state legislature to put a pause on this, so that people can really understand what the exemptions are being asked for and what the real impact of this is going to be. One of the council people, Bob Holden, asked one of the environmental groups, like, why are you in favor of this plan when there was no actual environmental impact study done? Like, why are you accepting an EA when we don't have a full environmental impact study? Well, she said, something is better than nothing. You know, I mean, really? It's a crazy answer to me, when the chair of the committee said, can you please tell us, you're going to have 60 days between the announcement barely of what the exemptions are going to be and the implementation of the tolls. What are people going to do? It takes 6 months to get a handicap license plate. How are you going to put that together? Again, no answer. When they talked about, the license plate issue, which came up, they said, oh, we're improving the algorithms every day to try to get ahead of these people with the license plates. What algorithms? People are just putting a piece of tape over their license plate. I mean, it's just going to be scofflaw heaven. But the problem really is, everybody's talking about it. They cannot give these exemptions. And you can see the look on these mobility review board people's faces. They are between a rock and a hard place, because every penny they reduce somebody's charge by is going to mean more that somebody else has to pay. They can't, they've been touting how this is going to be like London. We all know on this call, it's not going to be like London at all. They cannot, and Charles Komanoff, who's one of the leading proponents of congestion pricing, acknowledges that while everyone in the zone in London gets an exemption, we can't do that here, he says, because in their central business district, which is a true central business district, there were only 100,000 residents. In this so-called expansive so-called central business district. Again, this goes along with Open Street Central Business District, but Central Business District is from 60 all the way down to the end of the island. We can't give that because we have over 700,000 residents. And if we give the same exemption, the math just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I really don't understand why we are in favor of splitting up the island the way they are asking us to do. This is not creating transportation alternatives. It is going to create one horrible mode of transportation for everybody. And that is what I see is the greatest danger here. For my entire life, and I have to go back to this, whether you're working class, poor, or whatever, you could always get in a taxi and go a short distance for a reasonable price. You cannot do that anymore. You just can't do it. You get in a cab, it's a $5 fare and $7 of taxes and surcharges. That's not creating an alternative mode of transportation. And if you have to wait 15 minutes for a bus and you're a working class New Yorker, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? If you're an elderly New Yorker, what are you supposed to do? This plan, again, I say it over and over again, is going to make Manhattan for the wealthy and healthy. And that is just wrong. When I was going down to the hearing, I actually took an Uber from 72nd Street all the way down to Chambers at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I was there in 15 minutes. So I don't know where all the congestion was. And I know Erica had the same experience in a different cab. And I spoke to the Uber driver and I told him where I was going. And he said, you know what? I've been a driver for 30 years and I'm getting out because 70% of every fare I collect either goes to Uber or the government, and I can't make a living. Is this what we're really trying to do? I just think that this whole thing needs to be put on pause and it has to be evaluated based on what's happening in the city right now, not what was happening 5 years ago, because it's totally different. And I just want to end by saying, I think that the representatives of the South Bronx have sold their people really cheaply. They are basically saying for whatever the MTA has promised them in the form of a new asthma center or and putting valves on cars, that it's okay for their children to suffer the detrimental effects of increased asthma, so long as they get money from the MTA. is that economic justice? Not in my world. That's selling out. And I really don't understand it. I really don't understand it. And I'm in Andrew Fine's camp. I don't know what's going to happen here, but maybe the worst has to happen for things to get better, because our electeds aren't listening to us. And I appreciate what Matthew said about, believe me, we don't need to have a vote of no confidence. It's already out there, at least in my, I talk to the electeds all the time. We have a great relationship. I don't understand where they're coming from on this. And I just think maybe the worst has to happen, and we have to lose a lot of our tax base and a lot of the things that we enjoy about New York, about getting around easily. When you can't get a bus to take you across town, you can get a taxi pretty easily. If you fall and you lose the heel off your shoe, you're not going to be able to get in the taxi. So good luck, everybody. I don't know what else to say, and I thank you for indulging me. Take care.
Thanks, Valerie. Are you proposing that this committee take any action here?
I mean, I don't know. I appreciate what Craig said. I think you're right, Craig. We approve the concept of congestion pricing, but since we didn't really have any mechanics of the plan, I think we were reserving. And so that was really the purpose of creating this committee, was to look at the proposals as they've come up. But I don't know what else I don't know, Craig. I'd like to hear your opinion. I don't see, I mean, to me, the MTA, the Mobility Review Board, and by the way, I had a really good conversation with Will Schwartz, who's their director, after the last hearing to find out when the next one was. And they still have not decided when that's going to be. But I think they're trying to hold on here. They don't want people filing lawsuits, because I think Tommy Loeb and others are right. That's the only way to stop this now, because we can't get any elected to really toe the line. I don't know, Craig, what do you say? I mean, I don't think there's a resolution here, because we don't even have a tolling scheme yet. So
that's exactly what I was going to say. I think, especially tonight, it would be really hard to take any action, given that nothing really has changed since we've met in the past. We're still waiting for the TMRB to be able to provide some direction as far as all these questions. I think you're probably right. I think the writing is on the wall, that especially since they led off the meetings by saying that the goal is to try to keep tolls as low as possible, that they are going to be very just discerning when it comes to issuing exemptions. I think there will be certainly some. I think that as we are looking forward, we will probably likely have to respond to the TMRB if there were, I think, motivation to try to request the pause at that point. If people are up in arms over how that plays out, that would probably be the more appropriate time to try to do it. I would especially be reluctant tonight, since there are only 4 members of our board on here tonight.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm not really in favor of a resolution at this point, but I just think that at some point we're going to have to respond to what they issue. I don't think we're going to get a lot of time, but I think at whatever that next meeting is, I would just urge the co-chairs to have some electeds here, because like I said, I mean, the tone of the MTA was like, hey, if the elected said we didn't have to have it, we'd move on to something else, because frankly, the debt service for this is $15 billion. It represents less than 30% of their capital budget, and they could find the money somewhere else. So I don't know. I mean, Craig, you tell me, since when is it the purview of the Metropolitan Transit Authority to be interested in how congested the streets of the city of New York are? Isn't that like a DOT? I mean,
their buses, they talk about the buses being able to go more quickly down the streets if there's less congestion.
Yeah,
but they already have a dedicated bus lane. What more do they want? I mean,
no, but the MTA and New York City DOT coordinate on all sorts of issues, and the MTA being such a big umbrella agency representing not only the subways and buses and commuter rails, but having the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority there as well, and being an arm of the state government. Remember, it is an authority under state government, so it's all intertwined over there. So there's obviously, while it may not be a specific mandate of the MTA, the state and but when the budget bill was passed, the most appropriate party to implement this was the MTA, because the TBTA, with already having introduced and successfully operated Easy Pass for all these years, was always going to be the agency that was going to be at the helm of actually having to do this. So I think.
Yeah, I mean, my last point is, I just want to go back to the original congestion pricing surcharge that's on the taxis below 96th Street, which the community board came out against. And we've asked many times where that money goes. And I did ask that Will Schwartz the question, and he said, well, it's online all the time. And I said, I don't know where it is. So then he sent me this link, and he shows them where the money goes. I said, yeah, but nowhere in this link does it say that's where the surcharge, that's the use of the surcharge money. But he was very quick to say, and I know in Craig's summary, it says that as well, they have no intention of repealing that when this tolling thing goes into effect. They're just going to keep it. So we're going to be taxed like twice. We're going to be taxed on quote unquote rides below 96th Street. And then when we go across the zone, we're going to pay an additional $23. And when I said to Will Schwartz, I said, I don't understand. Why do I pay more than any other person who lives in the city of New York to come home from LaGuardia Airport and Kennedy Airport? Why does somebody who lives in Flushing, Queens get home for $2.75 less than I do? And you know what he said to me with a straight face? He said, wow. He says, I live in Albany, and we would love to have the train to the plane. And we don't have that. That's all I'm going to say.
I just like to remind you, Valerie, that when Richie Torres from the South Bronx first raised the issues of the pollution, the anticipated pollution on the Cross Bronx Expressway and in his community, the MTA, and I heard Jana Lieber say this on Brian Lehrer, he said that the MTA at the next procurement would get electric buses. That was the MTA's first response to Richie Torres's concerns. When the cab drivers talked about losing fares because people won't take taxis for exactly the reasons that you're stating, Lieber's, that right? I'm so confused by all these names. His response was, we'll make it easy for them to become bus drivers. There has been a dismissal of concerns, a dismissal of what sounds like legitimate concerns by the MTA all along. They have been, I feel like, just bated breath, waiting for all of the money that they see flowing over there. I know you and I have disagreed about this, Craig, but those were his words: the electric buses and becoming bus drivers as solutions to problems that people have raised and continued raising, other than buying off the South Bronx, as you raised, Valerie, and as Tommy Loeb raised.
Yeah, I can't, since I didn't hear those comments, I don't feel like I should opine on them, but
yeah. Well, I mean, you can play, there was a hearing, Craig, and you can hear Jana Lieber saying specifically that he was happy to take $110 million of the proceeds of congestion pricing to alleviate the increase in the detrimental effects of what he was proposing. And I thought it was quite ironic that he was taking proceeds from a program that he said he needed for infrastructure to pay off literally this community and the price of the health of young children, and just so cavalierly say that. And then everybody who came to the hearing from that community was like, oh, we're so happy that we got this money. And, just like, now it's all okay. We're fine, not really thinking of these individual children and adults who are going to be suffering every single day. And probably they're not going to see any of the, that money. Okay, they're going to build a building and they're going to have a doctor in it for asthma. but they're still going to be suffering over something that may or may not decrease congestion by, it's a side effect. It's a collateral side effect. And Erica and everybody else is right when they put the principal rationale for why they were doing this. It had nothing to do with alleviating the effects of climate change or congestion. And this is where I fault the city council. If they were really interested in reducing congestion, I'll say this again, it's two different things, interested in reducing congestion and fighting climate change, they would be committed to fixing the placard program by the end of the year. They would be committed to putting electric charging stations everywhere in the city of New York immediately, but they're not. They're not. So, so they're just laying it off on their state legislature friends, but they're not really doing anything that's within their power to reduce congestion and alleviate, the detrimental effects of climate change.
Well, it's also buildings are responsible for up to 90% of environmental emissions. Even Kathy Hochul has said that.
Right.
90%.
They're not changing the zoning law so that
No,
all
they're
new
not.
buildings have to have parking underneath, so we can widen the street for everybody who wants to use it and
Well-
take park cars underneath. In Japan, if you want to buy a car, you have to prove to the authorities that you have a place to park it.
That's a different topic though.
Oh, but I'm just saying, if you want to reduce congestion and you want
Yeah,
to,
no,
the
you're
street is as wide as it's going to be.
the MTA has said in its papers that the primary purpose of this plan is to raise revenue. The congestion and the so-called environmental benefits are an ancillary effect. They are
Well,
not the primary motivation.
The city council could say all city workers need to take public transportation. We're not going to give them a parking placard anymore.
They could.
They're not good, but if they're going to force everybody who lives in the zone to get on public transportation, why aren't they going to force city workers to do the same, including the electeds?
Well, you know what, Craig, maybe you have the answer to this. And I think you touched on it, Valerie, is the city's changed a lot since the pandemic. The pandemic's resulted in people not going into work at all or going in 2, maybe 3 days a week. Have there been any reports? I know they've talked about cars being at the same level as pre-pandemic levels. They said that at the TMRB meeting as well. But where do they get that information from? Where are people going, and are they driving because they were actually afraid or don't want to get on the subways because conditions have worsened also since people have been going back to work or since COVID? I just don't know what the answers are, and I'm really not sure. And maybe you do know what happens, and I think Valerie's raised this in the past, if the numbers don't match up, if the plan works, and as Erica and Andrew said, what happens? Where is the additional money going to come from? And do we know how many people are actually driving in to do something in the zone? And I just don't know that the numbers that their research or their studies have been updated.
Yeah, no, the numbers they report numbers all the time. They have detail in their information about all the New York City crossings and the number of vehicles that are crossing there. And I know that they monitor traffic all across Manhattan. And sometimes it's automated. Sometimes they do traffic counts and studies. Since the pandemic, I think some of what people are seeing, and sometimes people will witness less traffic than maybe they saw in the past, but that also is a result of the traffic volumes being shifted more across the day as opposed to the peak periods that we used to see, especially in the morning. And highway, I think I would have confidence in those numbers, and that's a separate discussion from travel patterns in general and how they relate to the increase in remote work and fewer people coming into the central business district on a daily basis. We know that's the case. We know there's also variability between Mondays and Fridays and midweek, and there are definitely higher volumes on midweek as more people have been working hybrid schedules, and more companies have been starting to slowly require employees to come in more regularly.
Yeah.
But as it relates to the and we've discussed this before regarding how the modeling is yes, there's a lot of it based off of data from before the pandemic, but it's not necessarily it's not necessarily irrelevant at this point, just because a lot of the underlying factors still exist, and I don't want to go back into things that we've discussed at length in the past, but
Yeah, well, I think we're going to see a lot of people. Sylvina Brooks Powers mentioned about having her baby and having to go into the city to have her baby, and now she would have to pay an additional whatever to come in. You're going to see a lot more people calling an ambulance service to take them into Manhattan so they don't have to pay the $25.
Well, the ambulance fee doubled a lot for the fire department.
Well, but I mean, it's going to be an emergency service. So if it's covered by your insurance, I mean, you're not going to see all the ways that it's going to cost everybody more money, but it's going to
Well,
cost people money.
You're absolutely right. It will, and we don't see it.
Well,
And
thank you.
that's
Please
the reason-
cut me off here. I don't want to talk any.
yeah. All right.
Yeah,
So,
for the
so
reasons we're doing this. So back to Andrew.
yeah, thank you, Valerie. So I'm just going to suggest, I know we have Andrew and Erica that wish to speak again. I'm just going to ask if you could just keep your comments brief. We're approaching the 9 o'clock hour, and I think we've probably exhausted this conversation for the most part tonight.
Thanks, Craig. Seems like an early night. I just want to say, like, there's still no details on any of the tolling proposals. We don't know if it's like $9, $23, whatever it is. And I said it before. I've been like Nostradamus on this for last year. I said they would put up the stanchions before we had any clue what they were going to charge with the stanchions. And sure enough, there they are. They've been traveling stealth. The reason why there's no widespread opposition is that everybody's holding out to this day, to this very day, when the stanchions are up. They're looking for the carve out. I had a conversation, was it this morning or yesterday, with a leader from the Chinatown Little Italy coalition or alliance, and they're going to have a meeting this week with Dan Goldman and other elected officials. For what? To ask for them to advocate for a carve out. Guess what? There's just no carve out. We are the piggy bank. Everybody inside the zone is the piggy bank. If we don't pay, it doesn't work. And we're the only people that really have, like, we have the least standing. Jersey can be like, it's unfair to us because we're a different state. How are you going to charge us? But like New Yorkers don't have that much standing. I know we're all going to sue. It's all good. But I just wanted to say that if you guys, considering that we're the piggy bank, and considering that there's no real organized opposition, because we still to this day don't know what we're fighting against and what the actual proposal is, I would say if that you were going to make a resolution tonight, my suggestion for a resolution would be resolve that the DOT should stop all infrastructure built until we know exactly what the terms of these tolls are going to be. I think that's only fair. I know you won't do it. I know, and by the way, I'm sure I probably speak for Billy since he's not here. But that's a joke. Anyway, bottom line is, I think that that there should be no more infrastructure build until we know exactly what the terms of this deal are. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And then Erica?
So my whole motivation in this is to help the people that always get harmed by these ill thought out government agency programs be not harmed or less harmed, and living with a chronic neurological disease, I'm going to be one of these people. But I'm fighting for people who don't have a voice and who don't have the kind of network like I do. Because to Valerie's point, he sold out his community for an amount of money that's going to be gone in a blink of an eye. And that community is going to be irreparably harmed for decades to come, if not for multi-generations. I'm exhausted by the fact that our elected officials who make less than a lot of us do seem to think that Manhattan is only for the wealthy. I truly am, it's just mind-boggling to me. I don't own a car for the very reason that it's too expensive to park in the city and it's too much of a hassle to drive around looking for spots if you don't have $500 to pay a month to garage a car. But I certainly rely on cars to get to my parents' downtown by Washington Square, to get to a multitude of things. I mean, I have spent, Valerie and Alita, you know this, I've spent over the last several months hours each week on this topic, writing to the Excel trackers full of journalists that I know because of what I do for a living. And they do not want to report on the opposition to this because of how entrenched transportation alternatives are with the special interest groups. So, and I don't have the money to initiate a lawsuit because I told the city council when I testified there that if I did, they would have been hearing from me the first time that way, not sitting in front of them. So I don't understand why there is nobody that will represent those of us who are in opposition to it, other than New Jersey, which the minute they get their concessions, they're gone anyway. And Staten Island did sign on Amici with New Jersey, and there's, you know, I don't know where Susan Lee is at this point with the Lower East Side and Chinatown. I don't think that's happened, but there are some other groups that are signing on. But, you know, there's got to be people that, you know, will join in a class against this. I mean, it's insane. I'm really good at sleuthing things out because of working in communications, and I don't know what to do anymore. You know, when you're sitting in a meeting agreeing with the woman from what's her name, the city council member from Queens, or yeah, when you're sitting there in a meeting and agreeing with her, knowing you're going to have to take a shower after that meeting, but then reconciling with yourself that in this instance, the means just, Palladino, the means justify the ends in this case because of how many thousands of people are going to be harmed by this. I mean, I don't know what to do. I really don't, because Nadler, Kruger, Seawright, certainly not Julie Menon, none of these people care about this. So I don't know what to do anymore.
I hear how frustrated you are, and I have no answers, but really appreciate your coming and sharing your insights and your comments with all of us.
I appreciate you listening.
Thank you.
All right, well, seeing no other hands up, I assume that we are ready to hopefully adjourn the meeting. Alita, do you have anything else? Otherwise, we will aim to schedule another meeting. We'll obviously try to keep everyone abreast of developments. And I think
just to whoever raised it earlier, I think, and the issue is there are so many meetings in any given month that it's very hard to secure a spot. But I think that as soon as we know when the next TMRB meeting is, that we should try and schedule one for shortly after that. And I think we should do everything in our power to get any and all of our elected officials to come. I know we've talked about this. I know Will has extended invitations to them in the past, but I think we need to have whoever is able to attend come, and maybe even expand our reach to, not that they would necessarily come, but to other districts, because it does affect the whole city, and see who's willing to come and listen. But I think we need to try again and get as many elected officials as we can to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have reached out to everyone, and we will do that again and try to make that a priority.
Their priority.
Yes. All right.
Well, I guess what you're asking for is if there is a motion
Yes,
to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. All right,
Valerie
Valerie.
has her hand raised.
I'll second.
Okay.
All right. Thank
Then
you,
let's
everyone.
say thank you, everyone, and thank you, Kevin.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. Have a great night.
Bye, everyone.